This is The Zero Hour with RJ Eskow, produced by the We Act Radio Network in Washington, D.C., and broadcast across the nation. Visit us online at thisisthezerohour.com or at youtube.com/thezerohour. Ladies and gentlemen, RJ Eskow.
Hello, everybody. One nation under siege. One city under a lockdown. In this hour, a special zero-hour report from our producer, Pete Callahan, on the ground there in Ferguson, Missouri. Special interviews and hopefully some surprise reports, as well as we update ourselves and you on the ever-changing situation there in Ferguson. And before we get started, a couple comments. A lot has been written this week about the transfer of used military equipment from the armed forces to police departments like Ferguson's all around the country. But this movement of physical resources has been accompanied by a psychological shift, too, a shift in public thinking, which has been driven by everything from popular culture to the news media. How often do we hear, for example, the good news about crime in America's cities? How often do we hear statistics like these? Give you one. From 1993 to 2012, overall violent crime, violent victimization declined from a rate of 79.8% per thousand people to 26.1%. From 1993 to 2011, the rate of homicides declined by 48%, from 9.9 to 5.1 homicides per 100,000 people. These numbers come from the most recent Justice Department report on criminal victimization. But how often do you see them on the news or read them in the headlines? Instead of that, we're treated to an endless stream of violent imagery. As several reports this week have indicated, the transfer of weapons from the Pentagon to domestic police departments has contributed quite a bit to the militarization of America's streets. And as Zed Jelani reports, Congress had a chance to stop that process when a bill co-sponsored by Democratic Representative Alan Grayson with the support of Republican Justin Amash was introduced in the House a couple months ago. But the Democratic and Republican leadership were against it and it failed. So that's a factor, this flood of military equipment onto our streets. The post-9/11 spike in national security spending has also been a major factor. The Department of Homeland Security keeps dispensing weaponry, eavesdropping equipment, and training to police departments all across the country of a very military nature. So we have to ask ourselves, who benefits from all of this? Well, defense contractors certainly do, since they can now argue that their products are used in the nation, for the nation, both abroad and then at home. So it gives them a new sales pitch. It also gives them new markets for direct sales to police forces and for selling replacement parts, ammunition, and other supplies. So they benefit. There's also political benefit for politicians whose ideology and presentation is based primarily on fear. We also saw this police-military complex heavily on display during the height of the Occupy movement, and a number of elected officials undoubtedly breathed a sigh of relief when the police's efforts against Occupy finally splintered that movement or drove it underground or certainly made it less visible. There's benefit for the media, too, since sensationalism is good for their business. In a disturbing segment we first reviewed last September, 60 Minutes offered what amounted to an infomercial for the militarization of the American police force in a segment entitled Counterinsurgency Cops. Here's some of the things we noted back then. The Cops episode featured footage of urban police in full military gear, carrying rifles with night scopes and kicking down the doors of an American home. Leslie Stahl led the audience through a manipulative exercise, which began with her telling her viewers that foreign counterinsurgency turned soldiers into, quote, warriors and community builders, going village to village, driving out insurgents while winning the hearts and minds of the population, quote. But, Stahl continues, we met a Green Beret who is finding out in his job as a police officer that this strategy might actually have a better chance of working right here at home in the USA. Yes, they actually said that on CBS. And this is straight from the official CBS script. Here's what Leslie Stahl said. Call him and his fellow officers counterinsurgency cops, exclamation point. The exclamation point is in the script. They're not fighting Al-Qaeda or the Taliban, but street gangs and drug dealers in one of the most crime-ridden cities in New England. As much as intuition might tell you otherwise, CBS seems to find nothing controversial about fighting suspected gang members or drug dealers who are legally only suspects with the same techniques used to fight those who are presumably enemy combatants on a foreign field of battle. So we could talk more about this. The Green Beret, who she interviews, is a state trooper named Mike Coutone. We're told that, quote, after returning from Iraq, Coutone had an aha moment when he was talking to a gas station manager in Springfield. You know, it goes on to say Coutone thought that Springfield was just like the situations he faced in Iraq, and he wrote a memo to his police chief, et cetera, et cetera. What Leslie Slaw didn't tell anybody was that this guy promotes himself with all of this stuff. He didn't think of it by himself. The American Civil Liberties Union has been studying the militarization of American police forces for years. Author Radley Balco has been writing about it going back many years. So it's not something that was dreamed up in one police officer's head. It's a trend that's taken place for the reasons that we've explained, because people benefit from it. But to hear 60 Minutes tell the story, counterinsurgency tactics just began with an aha moment. So look, at the end of the day, they're writing papers like Using Counterinsurgency Tactics, Techniques, and Procedures to Defeat Gangs in U.S. Cities. They've been doing it. They were doing that when this Mike Coutone guy was still overseas. So this is a process that's been ongoing, that's been the militarization of the American people. As one general observed, when you're protecting a crowd, as the police were supposedly doing in Ferguson, you don't point your weapons at the crowd. You point your weapons away from the crowd. That's not what's been happening in Ferguson. Now, in the last 24 hours, we've seen quite a turnaround. We'll ask Pete and the others about that. We've seen a turnaround as a new officer was brought in to take charge of the situation and immediately expressed his solidarity with the community. That's what should be happening all along. That's what we should see more of. We hope America learns a lesson from this, and we hope we can get an update that's informative for you as well as us when we come back after this. I'm Richard RJ Eskow, and this is the Zero Hour. And we are back on the Zero Hour. I'm Richard RJ Eskow, and joining us now is our very own executive producer, Pete Callahan, who has been on the ground for about 24 hours there in Ferguson, Missouri, where the situation has changed dramatically in the last day or so. Pete, how are you doing?
I'm pretty good, RJ. How are you?
I'm not bad, thanks. Good to have you. Good to hear your voice. So what's going on down there? What are you seeing?
So last night we got here about 10 o'clock or so and went right out and to the main strip where all the protests and actions going on. And it was a very, very young crowd, very active crowd. There was people riding on the street on the tops of cars, all holding their hands up, don't shoot is one of the big slogans they're using. No justice, no peace, you hear a lot of as well, things like that. And basically, like, whole area, and then people from surrounding areas are all just like massed here to basically like show their disgust in what happened to this kid who was 2 days away from going to college, basically, and who was shot by police pretty much totally senseless.
Okay, so we've got the hands up and don't shoot is wasn't that supposed to be what Michael Brown said to the officers before they shot him?
Yes. And different reports differ. So actually, it might have been after they shot him once already or shot at him. There's now been reports from the neighborhood that they found also stray bullets that look like the 9mm bullets that the police in Ferguson carry. And so yes, that's exactly where it comes from.
So, and that honking that we just heard in the background, where are you now?
So I am, I've been set up all morning doing live streaming for Credo Mobile and React Radio, and I'm in front of the mini mart they burned down about 3 nights ago. And this is kind of ground zero for a lot of the other news crews, as well as ground zero for where everyone's massed in the protest. And compared to last night, the crowd's a lot older and a tiny bit more docile, but still mad as all hell.
So the honking are people honking in support of the demonstrators?
Yeah. It's so there's demonstrators on the street holding signs, and people white and black are all honking their horns. And there's lots of news crews doing stand-ups and community activists. There's people from the community that are pissed off and scared because they worry about their child or them themselves or their sister or their brother, ending up like Mike Brown.
Right. Now, about that. Now, the police just released their report not too long ago, and I don't know if you've had a chance to look at it, but they promised
It was 9 a.m. local time this morning when they released it. I've looked it over, talked to some other journalists and community members who studied it more thoroughly than I, and it seems like they're trying to play misdirection more than anything else with this, and that while they just admitted in a press conference that was happening right up until this call started, basically, that yes, the officer was responding to allegations, not to allegations, but reports of an armed robbery or a shoplifting incident, but he still, even though he was responding to that, he ended up, basically yelling at Mike Brown to get out of the street. He was walking the street, and that's how that altercation started. Now their police are also saying that Michael Brown was the perpetrator, and basically what they're saying is that he stole like one or two cigarillos, small cigars, often, honestly, used to smoke marijuana with, to smoke as a cigar, but it was like something that cost like, $1.50. And so now that they're trying to slander this kid who did well in high school and was on his way to college in a community where not everyone goes to college, so they're even angrier now than they were before. And they also
that's what I was going to ask you. That's exactly what I wanted to get to ask you, which was, what was the reaction to this? Clearly, they're saying, and they released video that showed somebody looking like they took some cigars or something, but they're clearly trying to say that he was a suspect before this altercation happened, which, of course, in this country, even if you're a suspect, that's not licensed to shoot somebody. But what I was going to ask you was, how are people reacting? And it could well be what you described, which is a kind of slandering of the victim. But how are people? How does that alter the mood? Because we saw the reports last night that seemed to indicate the tension had really been lifted. The police were not being aggressive anymore. This new Commander Johnson had come in. And people.
So the governor called in the Highway Patrol and kind of tried to relieve the St. Louis police of their duty. And me and Seth, other guy on the ground here, tried to talk to some of the St. Louis County police and asked them how they were feeling. And they seemed pretty angry to be guarding the outposts for the Highway Patrol that were relieving their job. Also, though, in the press conference that just happened, the district attorney admitted that. While Michael Brown may or may not have, shoplifted a couple cigars, he also wasn't at the time, or the officer at the time when he confronted him, didn't consider him the suspect they were looking for. So it still kind of doesn't really help anything. And on top of all that, we have an issue where people are just looking at now pictures of this cop. And I also think the other one that I missed right now was that they didn't release the video initially, and they just said in the new press conference they're going to release the actual video at some point. We're not sure when. They only released stills from the video that showed him possibly stealing a couple cigars. So everyone here is much, much, much madder than they were last night, especially the elders community and a lot of the people that have been doing activist type and community support type stuff their whole lives. Went from being let's come together. There's a lot of unity here, and everyone's black men should be killing black men, and police shouldn't be shooting them because they think we're all criminals. And that's kind of the bottom line right now. I'm actually pretty worried about what might happen tonight, even with the new police force, because the district attorney and the attorney general are now saying it could be illegal for the governor to relieve county sheriffs of their command and bring in state troops.
So, and about that, Pete, we're talking with Pete Callahan on the ground in Ferguson, Missouri. About that, I was watching some of the television coverage last night, and I could definitely see what seemed to be tension between the state police and the local police, where they even had, two state police officers went to talk to a news crew, and then a white guy from the local police force, a white police officer, came and kind of tried to inject himself into that conversation. And I just got the sense that there might be tension between these two police forces. Any sense of that where you are?
There's actually a lot of that. So we tried to talk to some of the local cops last night, and they were obviously very unhappy that they were no longer really being active. Like, they were all, a large number of them were all basically stacked up in this parking lot that was cordoned off, basically, and probably told to just stay there. And so there's very, very little idea on the ground right now who is actually in control, who has jurisdiction over things. I've talked to other journalists and people on the ground, stuff like that, and really, there's very little idea who's actually in control here. And as more facts come out, and as it seems like the local authorities maybe obfuscating the truth, or these will affect that, tensions are rising, and the last thing you want in a situation like that is to have no idea who's actually in charge.
Oh, for sure. And so there's a court. You're saying there's some sort of legal challenge now to whether the governor is allowed to do what he did of bringing these state police in to take control of the situation?
Yes. The local authorities, I think, don't really like the idea, or the precedent especially, that their local control can be usurped by the governor. And even though it's worked very well comparatively to how it was working before, I think that between the ranks of police and the local politicians and people like that, that there is a lot of tension between those and those that were brought in to do the job they usually do. And so, yeah, it's very worrisome. Last night I wasn't really that worried. It seemed when we got on the ground, even though, we both brought helmets and gas masks, that we were getting here towards the end of it. We were getting here towards the more kumbaya moment. But now, after this morning, it seems like that, we could really see some more violence heat up here.
And what's the kind of feeling or vibration you get off the people around you? I mean, obviously there's a lot of unity, as you said, a lot of solidarity, and you're saying a lot of anger too. So
it's not just black people that are angry. There's white local people that are angry. There's college students from WashU and St. Louis, places like that are here, and they're all standing side by side saying, we can't allow this to keep happening in America. And that is, in many ways, a beautiful thing. The issue with it is that a lot of people are also not necessarily that opposed to, burning down businesses that they feel are taking money out of their communities and exploiting their communities. Like, they burned down a liquor store last night. They burned down this mini-mart we've been standing in front of. And while we hear a lot of very, very peaceful things towards the protesters themselves and how, we should all take care of each other, kind of like almost Woodstocky in that sense, they also are all very, very bad at the authorities, and it started to spill over towards the state police as well. And so the force that came in to try to replace the force that was making all the problems, really, is also now becoming untrusted by the protesters and locals, which could spell disaster later on tonight. During the day, I'm not that worried at all. At night, a couple times last night, I actually had someone try to steal my camera at one point because they were worried I was a cop. We took care of that situation.
All right, Pete?
And diffused it. I know.
Pete?
I usually get mistaken for a cop. Yeah, RJ, you there?
Right. We're going to have to go to break, but can we get you back in about 20 minutes?
Yeah, I'd love to. Just give me a call.
Okay. All right. Take care of yourself, and we'll be back after this. I'm Richard RJ Eskow. We will be back. This is the Zero Hour.
You are listening to the We Act Radio Network, produced in Washington, D.C. Visit us online at weactradio.com or at youtube.com/weactradiodc.
are back on the Zero Hour. I am Richard RJ Eskow, and joining us now is Ryan Grimm. Ryan is the Washington bureau chief for the Huffington Post. He's a former staff reporter with Politico.com and the Washington City Paper. He's won several awards for his journalism, and now he's responsible for the bureau as well. And Ryan, thank you for joining us.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
So listen, it's always a principle that journalists and news outlets don't ever want to be the story. But in Ferguson, the Huffington Post became the story. And what do you think? Do you think that Ryan, his name was Ryan O'Reilly, is that right?
Just Riley.
And so, just Riley, I'm sorry. Yep. Okay. Ryan Riley was a member of your team who was arrested down there along with Lowry from the Washington Post. And that seemed to be, both those guys were great about pointing out the injustice of this, but the notion of turning on reporters seemed to shift public opinion and political opinion. Some people think that's the reason why the state police were brought in. Do you have any thoughts on that or observations or information?
Yeah, somebody put together a Twitter map, kind of a heat map that shows how many mentions there were of Ferguson over this week, and right around the time, shortly after they got arrested, you just kind of see an explosion of it. And I think that part of it is that you're looking at a case that's a bit of a he said, she said. The community and the people who witness are saying that Michael Brown was killed in a certain fashion, and the police are saying it happened in a completely different fashion, and like they say in every movie, that he lunged for the gun, and so that you've got this. Some people might say, well, look, it's kind of gray. Well, we'll wait to weigh in until we get some more information here, but then you find the police assaulting and arresting journalists. Who, by their nature are credible. When they put something in the paper, people believe it because that's what they do with their craft. It's not he said, she said at that point. This is the fact that's being reported. So when they go and they arrest journalists, then I think people start to think, well, one of these sides is a pretty bad actor here, and so it ends up casting doubt on their already implausible argument for what happened, and at the same time, it raises questions about militarization of policing and civil liberties in general. People, I think, who were only tangentially tuning in immediately noticed the camouflage and the assault weapons and the tanks and the all the other bang toys that the police brought out to the protest. And then on top of that, you see some journalists get arrested, and you say, wait a minute, this is not something that happens in the United States of America.
Right, and I think also, I mean, they're both guys talked about the racial implications of them being white and so on, but I also think there's something about sitting with your lap.
Black, actually.
Oh, okay. Ryan talked about that.
Ryan talked a lot about that. Yeah.
Yeah, but there's something about whatever your ethnicity, about the idea that you're sitting in a Starbucks on your laptop. I just think a lot of people can identify with that experience as somebody then coming in and hassling you, go this way, no, go that way, slamming you into a Coke machine in Lowry's case, or the glass wall in Ryan's case, I think it was. So I think there's that. But I would. Where are you now? Are you in Washington, or are you?
I'm in Washington. Yeah.
So what are you hearing today from your guys there? Is Ryan there? Do you have other guys there?
Yeah, so Ryan and Christine Canetta, a HuffPost Live producer, reporter, is out there with him. And she actually had maybe a much tougher time than Ryan had because she was cut off from him by the police phalanx. He had everything, their car keys, all the equipment, and then the police fired tear gas, which pushed her and other people deep into the outer neighborhood, miles and miles and miles away from where she needed to get, and couldn't cross town because of the tear gas that they kept shooting. And actually, somebody on Twitter that we found finally went out and picked her and Brian up and took them back to their car that was still parked at the McDonald's at like 1 a.m. So that was kind of a harrowing experience for her. But so they're both out there, and what they're experiencing is that the different approach to policing has had a dramatic change on the mood there. When they kicked out the locals and brought in the highway patrol, and the highway patrol met them with hugs and handshakes and marched with them, and they showed up in their the kind of normal police garb that we've been used to seeing police in for a couple hundred years, or at least we think we're used to it, because the militarization is a lot more prevalent than we'd like to think, and that changed the entire dynamic. The people were not looking to loot or to riot, and so absent the police violence, it was a very peaceful night and another peaceful day so far.
Well, so I hear, but we have a guy on the ground there too who's telling us that since the police report came out claiming that Michael Brown committed a crime just before the incident and his death, he says the tension is rising again. I don't know if you're hearing that from your folks there.
Yes, no question. The tension is rising, and there's a ton of anger that's still there. There's no question about that. The anger hasn't gone away, but the violence was very much one-sided, and so now that one side has stopped being violent, it's become much more peaceful. Now, there's no saying where it goes in the future, but as of now, there's lots of anger and tension, but nobody's acting violently.
Have your folks done any analysis on a sort of forward-looking situation, how long this series of confrontations, demonstrations, and so on might be expected to go on, or is it just anybody's guess right now?
It's anybody's guess at this point. There still is the autopsy that needs to be released, and so that will kind of trigger some more tension as if the story is accurate that he was shot in the back as he was running, and then you'll be able to count the number of times that he was shot and where and from what range. So that still remains to happen, and this release of this videotape, even though the police are now saying it is completely unrelated to why the police stopped Michael Brown, yet they released it anyway, has certainly tossed some gasoline on the situation.
Right, especially if they say it's unrelated, it seems all the more inflammatory because it seems like character assassination of a dead person, doesn't it?
Right. Now, he said, the police chief said, well, I had to release it. Journalists were asking for it. I can only assume that the journalists who are asking for it, if that's true, learned of it, through police leaks. That happens where somebody will tell me, hey, you should file a FOIA for X. And then I'll file the FOIA, and then boom, there I got what the source wanted to give me. Otherwise, I don't know how else anybody would have known to even ask for this. His friend was up front about what happened at the convenience store when he spoke to federal investigators. So authorities would have known about this, even absent the video. But no, he said, I was forced to release this because of the freedom of information, et cetera. So great for him and his transparency. Nobody forced him to, hold a press conference and, hold up stills and go through a whole dog and pony show to draw attention to it. The police department continues to be criticized from all all parts of the spectrum, left to right, for its incompetence here.
You know, I think to look for a historical parallel to this, and other people have done this, I think we really do need to go back 50 years to Little Rock and some of the other places where you had one jurisdiction's police force in conflict with another, acting at cross purposes, and God knows where it all heads. But listen, Ryan Grimm, Washington Bureau Chief for the Huffington Post, an institution I know well. Thanks so much for joining us. I wish your guys safety out there, as I wish my own, and thanks so much for coming on the show and talking about it.
Hey, and thank you for all your contributions. We always appreciate them. Great stuff.
Thanks, man. Thank you very much. And we will be back right after this. I am Richard RJ Eskow, and this is The Zero Hour. And we are back on the Zero Hour. Joining us once again is our reporter on the ground, our producer, Pete Callahan, there in Ferguson, Missouri. Pete, any update?
So, yeah, I've actually gotten out of where I was now and driven around a little more. I'm in a car at the moment and kind of seen some of the damage from the night before. It looks like it was mostly businesses that weren't owned by the community. And it's building right now. It's people are starting to go to work. It's Friday afternoon, and people are watching the news from work, obviously, and they're pissed, and they're taking to the streets.
They're pissed. That's the word you're using. So,
like, they're extremely, extremely angry about what's going on, and the way, like, not like to a man, everyone seems like that. The authorities are obfuscating the truth on purpose, try to cover it up. And there's nothing worse than something like this happening than to have the authorities handle it very, very poorly.
All right. So, well, first and foremost, stay safe out there. And I'm going to read a couple things, and I'm just interested in your response to it. Palestinians have begun sharing advice with protesters in Ferguson. I don't know if you've heard about that there, but from Occupied here are some tweets. From Occupied Palestine, we stand with the oppressed in Ferguson. Another, made in USA tear gas canister was shot at us a few days ago in Palestine by Israel. Now they are used by Ferguson in Ferguson and Missouri. And then they tweeted advice. Don't get too far from the police. If you're close to them, they can't tear gas you. Always make sure to run against the wind and keep calm when you're tear gassed. The pain will pass. So our demonstrators there are aware of this sort of thing, whether it's from Palestine or anywhere else in the world, that people have been expressing support for them elsewhere in the country and elsewhere in the world?
I hadn't heard about that specifically, but I have heard among people on the ground a lot of parallels between what's going on in Gaza and occupied Palestinian territories in Israel and what's going on here. A lot of the references are to American empire that's turned on anything that's black or brown, basically. And they're using, military hardware to occupy a area that is predominantly black with white forces that are armed to the teeth and look like stormtroopers. So that's the one thing. On the other hand, the rubber bullet thing, which has been for years done by the Israeli army to quell protesting and stuff like that, where you shoot rubber bullets usually, like you're supposed to shoot rubber bullets at center mass, you don't hurt someone. You can still get someone a heart attack that way, but you're not going to maim someone. And so they've been saying that just like in Israel, these guys have been shooting to maim. So they're shooting headshots, they're shooting arm shots, femurs. They're trying to maim people just like they are in Palestine here. And the people on the ground are very aware of that and drawing lots of parallels to it. And the military hardware aspect, which also worries me about what's going on tonight, because the state police and the local police are massed in this big parking lot and shopping center, and they're still holding on to all their tanks, all their armed personnel carriers, and all that stuff. Like, they can, at any minute, turn all that stuff right back on. And so it's very, very much like Occupied Palestine, and the people here know it.
So I want to read you something real quickly that I came across the other day, and this is from a report that was written about police violence, and it includes this. The nature of the response to the situation was unrestrained and indiscriminate police violence on many occasions, particularly at night. That violence was made all more shocking by the fact that it was often inflicted upon persons who had broken no law, disobeyed no order, made no threat. These included peaceful demonstrators, onlookers, and large numbers of residents who were simply passing through or happened to live in the areas where confrontations were occurring. Newsmen and photographers were singled out for assault and their equipment deliberately damaged. Fundamental police training was ignored, and officers, when on the scene, were often unable to control their troops. As one police officer put it, what happened didn't have anything to do with police work. The report concludes, if no action is taken, the effect can only be to discourage the majority of police officers responsibly and further weaken the bond between police and community. Although the crowds were finally dispelled, the problems they represent have not been. Surely this is not the last time that a violent dissenting group will clash head-on with those whose duty it is to enforce the law. And this is from the report, and the next time the whole world will still be watching. Pete, those words were written in 1968 after the violence at the Chicago Democratic National Convention. That was the Walker Report, which the governor commissioned to determine what had gone wrong. They determined that the Chicago police force had conducted what was described as a police riot. Did we see a police riot the other night in Ferguson, and should we be worried about another one?
I think we should definitely run another one. I think we definitely did. My feeling from people talking to people on the ground, stuff like that, was that, it was pretty much a peaceful protest. People were really, really angry, but no one was trying to destroy property or anything like that until they were provoked by the police, is the number one thing that I've seen and heard. And I was talking to journalists that were on the ground then, local journalists and stuff like that, especially, who were here. And so, yes, and it's kind of like the quote, like, cry havoc and let slip the dogs of war. Like, these guys really couldn't control their own people. And a lot of it, too, I think, was the brass, was the sergeants and lieutenants and stuff like that, who were egging their own people on to be more brutal even. And that was kind of a scary thing. You might have seen the video where there was a sergeant in the local police force yelling, goading protesters, calling them effing animals and stuff like that. This has been very, very common, it seems like, when they respond to things like this. And for the most part, it was people that were, just like any other march you see in D.C. I've been to a lot of these, over the years of my time living in Washington. People do it all the time. D.C. police know how to handle it. They don't show up in riot gear. They talk to people like people, and nothing bad really happens. But if you dress people up in riot gear and treat everything like a riot, and you're already seen as an occupying force because you're an all-white police force in a very, very, very prominently black city, it's gonna escalate the situation to the point that no one can really control it, and the police definitely are lost control of their own people and everything else.
All right. Well, we're gonna keep watching. Obviously, we want you to stay safe. So Credo and We Act Radio and the Zero Hour have a live stream that you've been running. Where can people go to find that?
So they can actually find it at act.credo.org/go/Ferguson. Or if you search on YouTube, the channel is Credo's Ferguson Justice Live. And we're going to post a lot of videos there that are not just the 4 and 5 hour long live streams we're doing. A lot of shorter videos you can share with people and a lot of reactions from the crowd and stuff like that. And we're also putting up tons of photos and other media on social media and places like that.
All right. Well, Pete Callahan, stay safe out there. Thanks. And we'll conclude our report from Ferguson again by repeating those words from 1968. Although the crowds were finally dispelled on the nights of violence, the problems they represent have not been. Surely this is not the last time a violent dissenting group will clash head-on with those whose duty it is to enforce the law. And the next time, the whole world will still be watching. The whole world still is watching, and so are we. I'm Richard RJ Eskow, and this is The Zero Hour.